Oh, is this an
Oh,
image?
oh, it is an image. Okay, that's right. You can't.
That's fine.
That's
We can.
all right. I'm going to let people in, and we're live on Facebook.
Excellent.
I'm going to turn the waiting room off. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. We are going to wait just a few minutes after 3 probably to start this thing.
Hello, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
This issue came up yesterday, or this question came up yesterday, but we have no problem ejecting people that may cause problems. I know that there has been issues with candidate forums across the state over Zoom. So for everybody, please don't worry about that. We're muting and ejecting without question. So.
Okay, this is Brooke Page. I have no picture on my little screen here. Can you guys see me?
Not yet.
We can hear you.
Okay. Is there anything else I need to do on my end? I'm a little bit of a Luddite here.
Are you on a phone or a computer?
Oh no, I'm on a computer, and matter of fact, the camera was on until I opened up with you guys. Now it's the little light's going off.
Let's see. I can turn on. I'll see if I can turn on your camera for you.
Okay.
So I'm hitting ask to start video. You should get something that'll pop up.
Oh yes, start my video. Got it. There we go.
I can see
Now
you.
I don't know if that's me or not, but that's okay. I see Linda Joy's name here. Is she going to be on today? I hadn't seen her listed originally.
Yes. She wasn't able to make yesterday, which was the one we had the auditors on, but
oh,
so I asked if she could join today.
Excellent.
And I truly appreciate that accommodation. Thank you so much.
Of course.
When this thing gets started, will everybody be tiled up on the screen, or?
The way it'll work is that the person that is actively talking is going to show up on the screen next to the slide that you see.
I got you.
Also be sure if you're on just to keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. That cuts down on a lot of the background and reverberate noises. Christopher, what time would you like to start?
Let's give it another minute or so.
Okay.
I think we're good to go.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us on this rainy Sunday, at least rainy in Brattleboro.
No, we're bright and sunny up here.
Oh, lucky. So this is the Southern Vermont Young Professionals Statewide Candidate Forum, Part 2. We had our first part yesterday, and this candidate forum covers candidates for Lieutenant Governor, Secretaries of State, and Attorney General, as well as adding State Auditor to the list today. Our two moderators are Christopher Lukasik. He works for the Windham County State's Attorney's Office, and John Pritchard, who works for Costello Valenti Gentry PC. Christopher?
Hi, everybody. As Sarah said, my name is Christopher Lukasik. I am a victim advocate with the Windham County State's Attorney's Office in Brattleboro. I also live in Brattleboro, and I am currently the Outreach Committee Chair for the Young Professionals.
Great, thanks. Again, I'm John Pritchard. I'm an associate attorney at Costello Valenti and Gentry PC down here in Brattleboro. I'm living here for close to 3 or 4 years now, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Southern Vermont Young Professionals. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. So a few disclaimers. Please note that questions asked here are not reflective of the Windham County State's Attorney's Office, State of Vermont, Costello, Valenti, and Gentry, Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation, or the Southeastern Vermont Economic Development Strategies. We're here as part of our involvement with the Southern Vermont Young Professionals and to provide a forum for young professionals to get to know the candidates for public office. Inclusion in this event is not an endorsement from the Southern Vermont Young Professionals or either of the moderators' employers. And inclusion in today's event was offered to all people who are going to be printed on the ballot.
Let me get some of the friendly reminders up. Few housekeeping or Zoom keeping rules. Please keep yourself muted if you are not talking. As personally, I completely detest when there are echoes on Zoom. We hold the right to mute microphones of any people who do not. If you do become disruptive at any point in the Zoom event, to the point where we cannot move forward, we hold the right to eject you from the event. Our facilitator, Sarah, will be in control of muting and unmuting people throughout the event.
Thanks. And if you're meaning to talk and your microphone is muted, one of us will let you know to unmute your mic. And we are pretty firm that if anyone's doing any sort of like Zoom bombing or otherwise intentionally trying to like derail the event, we'll shut that down pretty swiftly. So to start off, we're going to go list through all the candidates who we have for these particular positions. We'll quickly run down everybody who will be running for the various states offices, and they'll be printed on the ballot.
So we're going to run down everybody on the ballot. On the screen is the people that are currently that have RSVP'd yes to this event. So I'll start with running down the candidates for Lieutenant Governor. We have Tim Ash of Burlington. I believe Tim is here. So if Tim, you want to give a 3-minute introduction of yourself, please feel free.
I would love to. Thanks. And thanks to everyone for tuning in today. I'm Tim Ash. I am currently the president of the Vermont State Senate. Quick bio: after graduating from UVM, I went to work in Bernie's office for about 3 years. Spent most of my career as an affordable housing developer for an organization called Cathedral Square, which is the largest affordable housing provider for older Vermonters and people with disabilities in Vermont, and developed about 400 units of housing, including a couple solar projects and one of the largest weatherization projects in Vermont's history. It was actually in that work that I found myself in an association not unlike the young professionals that are gathered today, mostly working with real estate agents and other housing professionals. It was actually critical to my own growth on the job and success at work. Over the last 4 years, I've been the president of the Senate, have been really blessed to help lead the state alongside the Speaker on a policy agenda, which was very forward thinking, protecting women's reproductive rights, funding our lake and river cleanup, doubling the amount of weatherization funding, gun safety legislation, the first time in Vermont's history that we've taken meaningful action there, and protecting consumers from all sorts of abuses from large multinational companies. And the list goes on and on. But I think over the last 4 months, I've been most proud of helping lead the state through the COVID crisis, working with the speaker and almost on a daily basis with the governor. It has been the most grueling but rewarding time in my public service career. I'm running for lieutenant governor in large part because I have a vision for the state, which continues to be positive despite the difficult times we're in. A couple key themes. One is I really believe we need to reorient our state's economic development policies around the socially responsible business ethic, companies that take care of their people, the planet, while they make a profit. I believe strongly that our efforts to clean up the environment and fight climate change should be done in ways that save people money, and I'm happy to expand on that in a little bit. And then broader themes of affordability, and particular want to move forward with a significant housing bond to support new construction and rehab throughout the state so that young people can buy first homes and find affordable rentals. Over the last few years, other issues we've worked on and that I've taken a leadership role in, we've made one of the most significant boosts in childcare support for young families in about 2 decades, have been the lead voice protecting our K-12 system from very, very serious cuts proposed by the governor. And we've made some strides moving forward and plugging the last broadband gaps that have been left by the for-profit companies. So I'll leave it there so I don't run out of time, but I look forward to answering your questions and engaging from here on out. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. And I don't know if we mentioned this, but if you do reach the 3-minute mark, we will mute you. We'll apologize, but we will mute you.
I wanted to avoid that outcome. So
I figured. Next, we have Dana Colson of Sharon.
Yes, Dana Colson, candidate for lieutenant governor. I'm a native Vermonter raised on a dairy farm where I worked and learned the value of hard work and integrity. I held my first full-time off-farm job at 14 years old for the village of Barton. I grew up hunting and fishing here, went on to college at Vermont Tech in Franklin Pierce, where I earned degrees in mechanical engineering and business management. Not only do I have a great education, but I also have the real world experience to back that up. I have worked in businesses locally and internationally for over 30 years. I've worked in agriculture, manufacturing, construction, and trucking. 5 years ago, I started my own business, North Country Welding Supply, LLC. I do business with hundreds of other small businesses, highway departments, and individuals all over the state. I also serve as the financial clerk for my local church. I've been working closely with the Tunbridge Intelligence-Based Policing Group on the opioid crisis and criminal justice reform. Vermonters are struggling. One-party rule has hurt our economy. Businesses and native Vermonters are fleeing our state because of high taxes, unrestricted government spending, and overregulation. We cannot keep growing government and shrinking the private sector. This is unsustainable. We need a thriving private sector to support a smaller, more efficient government. We are losing our farms, while COVID-19 has highlighted how out-of-state corporate food supply chains break down, leaving our supermarket shelves bare. We cannot count upon those who created these problems to fix them. We need new leadership and new direction. Much like Dr. Luther King Jr. had a dream, I have a vision for Vermont. I envision a Vermont with lower taxes, common sense regulations, and a much stronger economy. We must produce more than we consume to make a profit. I want a Vermont where the economy is so strong that Vermonters and businesses that have fled want to come back home. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Continuing on the list, Chris Erickson of Chester is running for the lieutenant governor. Chris is not here. Next on the list is Molly Gray of Burlington.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Sarah. It's great to be back in Brattleboro or Southern Vermont virtually. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here tonight because it's because of our young professionals. It's because of a generation that's trying to make it work here and stay in Vermont, a generation that may want to come home and is having trouble doing that, and a generation that may want to come to Vermont but isn't sure it's going to be possible. It's for our generation that I'm running for lieutenant governor. So just a little bit about me. I grew up in Orange County, up in Newberry, but my folks, my dad's from Putney, my mom's from Marlborough and Dummerston. And so my roots run deep in Southern Vermont. I'm a proud product of Vermont's education system. I went to Newberry Elementary School and Oxbow High School. I proudly ski raced for the University of Vermont and attended Vermont Law School a little bit later in life. Over the last decade and a half, I've worked in Washington for our Congressman Peter Welch, and I'll share that before graduating from UVM, I hadn't really left the state, and I sold my old Saab 900 and bought a slightly more reliable Subaru and moved to Washington. And you can leave Vermont, but Vermont never leaves you. So after working for the International Committee of the Red Cross at the height of the Iraq War and leading missions into conflict zones and advocating for the rights of Guantanamo detainees, I came home. I was really proud to go to the Vermont Law School. And then I lived and worked across our state in Tunbridge and South Royalton and Bethel and Rutland, and was also able to do some pretty incredible work with the State Department, helping to launch an international association to hold private security contractors accountable for human rights. And over the last 2 years, I've served statewide as an assistant attorney general. And what I know is that it's not enough to pay people $10,000 to move to our incredible state. What I hear from Vermonters, our generation, day in and day out, is that we don't have childcare. We still don't have access to affordable housing. A fourth of Vermont still cannot get online. We still don't have proper access to jobs that exist in our communities right now because our higher education system is just not accessible and it's just not affordable. Student loan debt is absolutely crippling for our generation, and it's incredibly hard to stay here, to work here, to live here. So I'm running because I want to elevate the voices of our communities. I want to elevate the voices of our 7 young professionals networks and really galvanize all of the energy, the momentum, the innovation that we have in the state to truly take us forward in those areas. And I really look forward to talking about my policies, ideas tonight. And thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Molly. The next person on my list is Meg Hansen of Manchester. Meg is not here. After Meg is Jim Hogue of Calais. And I believe I pronounced all that right. And if not, please correct me.
That would be Callus.
Callus. Excellent. Jim, do you want to give an introduction?
Right. I would say I wish people pronounced it Calais. But,
We're not hearing you good.
you can't hear me?
If you want to bring your computer closer to you, I think that would help.
Well, I have the microphone very close to me. How's that? Is there a way for me to turn up my own volume?
Oh, that does help for me at least.
I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Jim, I think you're okay.
Yeah, whatever you're doing right now, I can hear you better.
oh, all right. I was pointing the microphone in the wrong direction. All right. So here we are in Calais. If you're from out of Vermont, or I'm in Calais if you're from Vermont. And I've been here for 30 years. I'm an actor who performs regularly in Vermont. I operate a small farm. I was a former high school and college teacher of French and theater. On the activist front, I wrote the Vermont bill, now Vermont statute, prohibiting electronic voting in Vermont. I write for Vermont Independent on Vermont history and public banking. And my latest article there is an article called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. That's part 1 and part 2. I have worked in the trenches in Montpelier toward a state bank, gotten somewhere with it, a state bank resembling the State Bank of North Dakota. And I am a libertarian who believes in state sovereignty and secession from the Federal Reserve, because he who creates the money is the sovereign. The bankers are the sovereign now. The proof of that is they ordered Obama and Holder to kill the prosecutions of the criminal bankers on Wall Street, and he did so. So that's an indication of that. One of the main reasons I'm doing this is because I want to point out that the concept of the nation state now, especially the United States, is a nostalgic fiction. And that came to light during the speeches of Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski. Brzezinski said the nation state as a fundamental unit of man's organized life has ceased to be the principal creative force. International banks and multinational corporations are acting and planning in terms that are far in advance of the political concepts of the nation state. Rockefeller said something very similar, and he thanked the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. And there he's talking about the New World Order and the abolition of the nation state. The world has grown far more sophisticated and willing to move towards a global government that no longer knows war, but only peace and prosperity for all of humanity. The supernatural sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national self-determination practiced in past centuries. So my comments today and answering those questions.
10 seconds,
Is that it?
5 seconds.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I look forward to the questions.
Thank you, Jim. After Jim, we have Debbie Ingram of Williston.
Thank you, and thanks for holding this forum. It's good to be with you today. So I'm Debbie Ingram. I'm running for the Democratic nomination for Lieutenant Governor, and I'm currently a state senator serving Chittenden County. It's my 4th year. Before that, I was on the Williston Planning Commission and on the Williston Select Board, so I have municipal experience as well. I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit that's all across the state. It's called Vermont Interfaith Action. And we bring together people of all different faith traditions in 60 different congregations in different parts of the state together to try to affect systemic change around issues of social justice. So we've concentrated on things like affordable housing and economic dignity and criminal justice reform and education. So I've brought those experiences to my time in the Senate as well. I've been doing that for 13 years. I first came to Vermont with my now ex-partner to get a civil union. So we were in the first batch of people to do that as soon as the law was enacted in 2000 and traveled all over the state at that time and just really fell in love with Vermont. So a couple of years later, we moved here. We had been living in Bangladesh for 7 years, working for non-government organizations on different kinds of projects for poverty alleviation. And that was really an incredibly important time in my life. Very important to meet extremely resilient and resourceful people living in profound poverty, but truly coming to understand what it means to be a global citizen, part of a global community, and understanding that we human beings are certainly all more alike than we are different. Since I have been running for the Lieutenant Governor, I first thought of the 3 issues that I would most want to focus on, and they were affordable housing and healthcare and economic dignity, and that was before COVID. Since COVID, I have felt that those 3 issues are even more important. And I also would definitely include racial justice in that as well. And I think one of the things that we've seen with the pandemic is that it's highlighted the gaps in our systems. if people had been able to make a minimum wage that was close to a livable wage already, they would have had savings to be able to manage when they lost their jobs or had to be furloughed from their jobs for long periods of time. So we've seen the gaps in the system, but we also see the opportunities for making change. And I'd like to be part of making bold change.
Sorry, Debbie, we had to cut you off. After Debbie, I have Scott Milne of Pomfret, who is not here. And after Scott, I have Brenda Siegel of Newfane.
Hi there. I'm Brenda Siegel, and it's good to be home virtually. And I am running for Lieutenant Governor because we need to build a path forward for marginalized and forgotten voices to have a seat at the table. And we need those voices to have equal voice and equal power. I advocate inside the legislature, and what I've heard so many times is, Brenda, you're not bringing us enough people on this issue. We need to bring the people to the people's house. I'm a single mom who has faced adversity. I started my first business in Brattleboro at 26 years old. I faced unbelievable barriers, both from being a woman and from being a low-income single mom. I've turned that adversity into action. I started the Southern Vermont Dance Festival following Tropical Storm Irene, in which my son and I lost all of our belongings. The Southern Vermont Dance Festival brings 3,000 to 5,000 people to town every year, into our businesses and into our restaurants and into our hotels to make sure that we are actually driving our economy all the time. I know that the most powerful change is possible when the people who have faced the problems are at the decision-making table. We know that focusing on bold climate action, us in Brattleboro and Southern Vermont especially, that focusing on bold climate action, building a bottom-up economy, healing the overdose crisis, and supporting and strengthening our education system must be encapsulated in an overarching framework that brings together climate justice with economic and racial justice. We need innovative structure to build community together where people not only can survive, but they also can thrive. I've spent my life as a teacher, a movement builder, and a small business owner. I've gotten my son through graduation, all among immense barriers. I know that the only way we have these changes is to build this movement on the ground. We have to work in partnership together because we will have the most incredible power when we're building Vermont together. It is time right now. This is our moment to have those exact voices in the legislature. It is time, come hell or high water, to bring this movement to Montpelier.
Thank you, Brenda. After Brenda, I have Dwayne Tucker of Barrytown, who is not here. And that wraps up the list of candidates for Lieutenant Governor. For State Auditor, present here today is Linda Joy Sullivan of Dorset.
Thank you so much for allowing me to join you today. I know I was scheduled for yesterday and you've been absolutely wonderful in accommodating me. I would like to actually thank everybody who's holding office and everybody who's running for office, because it's courageous, it's difficult, and I think it's absolutely wonderful when people come forward. So I'm actually running for the State Auditor of Accounts position. And I know that's not very glamorous, and I know it's hard work, but I believe it's something that's dear to my heart since I am an auditor. But I'd like to give you a little bit of background just on me personally. I have a daughter and a stepdaughter who are young professionals. So I hear constantly about the frustrations of being a young professional. And I would love to get more into the details of that. I also started working when I was very young and put myself through college as I worked through college in New York. I went to the public schools. I actually ended up teaching in the public schools there. I owned and operated some dance studios, and I developed my professional career when I moved to Florida. And it was there that I established a public accounting firm in a male-dominated area. I got my CPA, my MBA, my LLM, and actually went into public accounting, which is auditing, with my area. I became a turnaround specialist. I currently am sitting in my second term as a legislator from Dorset, and I represent the Bennington-Rutland area. And right now I said, what am I going to do? I have to use my skill set to give back to Vermonters. And from what I saw in the legislature and when I looked at my skill set, I said, okay, the Auditor of Accounts, this is where you would probably best suited. And then I reviewed the statutes, and the more I looked at the position, the more I felt this is where I belonged and could really help Vermonters. So I have been a court-appointed receiver. I've been a turnaround specialist. I've actually was the receiver for the Vermont State Bank and the bond bank, and in Rutland when they had an issue there, and that was successful. I actually have a skill set that I believe is unique to auditing. I'm a peer reviewer of other auditors. I am trained in the area, and I want to thank you for giving me the time to speak to you.
Thank you, Linda. Also running for Auditor of Accounts will be Chris Erickson of Chester and Doug Hoffer of Burlington. Chris and Doug are not here today. So I'm going to tag in John to introduce the candidates for Secretary of State.
All right, thanks, Chris. First, we have Jim Condos of Montpelier. Go ahead, Jim.
Thank you, and good afternoon. I want to thank you for this opportunity. Young professionals and young adults are so important to our future, and as the office is prime in the area of elections and voting, I can't say that enough, that young professionals and young adults are really our future, and we need to focus on that. Just as an aside, I back in 2010, I fully supported a constitutional amendment that allowed 17-year-olds to vote in our primaries if they turned 18 by the general election. That constitutional amendment won by an 80-20 split. As far as my background, just so you know now, I am the state's top election official. I'm pretty busy these days, going into a week from tomorrow, from Tuesday. And I think it is important that our democratic process continues strongly. I am a proud second-generation American. Nearly 100 years ago, all four of my grandparents immigrated to the United States from Greece. They spoke only Greek when they got here. They were uneducated. They were penniless, and we've had very good. Their offspring has really developed well. They all became U.S. citizens. They loved this country dearly. Times were different then, and their experience was certainly much different than what we're experiencing, or what those who are immigrating these days are experiencing. My own daughter left Vermont for college. She was down in Atlanta. She got her CPA and she got married. She has 2 children and currently has moved back to Vermont, where she wanted to be. Her husband is also from Vermont, and they live in the house that my daughter grew up in. What has really struck me over the years is how much the right to vote meant for my family. When I was first elected as a South Burlington city councilor, my father cried when I was sworn in. When I was elected and sworn in as a state senator, he was visibly crying. And when I became a Secretary of State, my father really, he was just flabbergasted. He just couldn't believe that I had gotten to this point in my life. And I remember as I was taking him back to the airport, they had since retired to Florida. And as I was taking him back to the airport, my father asked me from the front seat of the car, are you, do you now report to Hillary? And I said, no. That's a different Secretary of State. The Constitution
Sorry, Jim, we had to cut you off there a little bit over the 3 minutes, but great, thank you very much. Next candidate we have is Chris Erickson of Chester, who I do not believe is here. And then Brooke Page of Washington. Now, I know, Brooke, that you're listed as running for Attorney General as well, but we'll read your name off again when we get to that position, but this will be your chance to introduce yourself now as well, okay? Go ahead. You seem to be muted there, Brooke, if you want to unmute yourself.
Okay,
Great.
here I
thank you.
am. Everybody can hear me, I hope.
Yep, you're good to go.
Very good. I'm Brooke Page. As you said, I'm from Washington, Vermont. I've been a Vermonter for about 35 years, having been raised in Delaware and further south from there. Went to college at the University of Delaware, so one of the presidential candidates this time out is one of my fellow alumni. Oddly enough, I'm running as a Republican and he's, I guess, a Democrat. I worked in Philadelphia and commuted back and forth to Vermont for over 30 years. Loved it here, but the wages I could find were down in Philadelphia. I ran my own business. I'm running for Secretary of State and Attorney General. I guess you're telling me to concentrate on the Secretary of State office this time, and I'll get a little more time later on. My biggest concerns, or one of the biggest responsibilities of the Secretary of State's office is elections. And I think that there's a number of troubles with elections, some of which have already been addressed at my urging, and others still lie before us. Most importantly, right now, is the vote by mail concept, where we would mass mail ballots out to every single registered voter. And there's troubles with this because you're flooding the countryside with ballots, many of which are going to either find no home or find a nefarious home and be sent back. Several states have totally vote by mail currently, but they all have a way of authenticating the returned ballots through a number of ways. The best way being having voter ID, which my opponent has vehemently opposed in the past, and maybe he's had a change of heart. Beyond that, the voter checklist in other states have signatures, samples that you can compare, or partial social security numbers that they include on the absentee ballots when they're returned, or date of birth. There are other ways that something that's not apparent in the mailing that they have to use or include in their returned ballot to authenticate the ballot. The other big problem we have coming up in this election, also related to vote by mail, is vote harvesting, which is basically where advocate groups and different people go out, and now that they know everybody has a ballot, they go out seeking those ballots to collect them up and bring them back to the polling places. And while it sounds like a thing of virtue, very quickly in many places it's turned into something less than that.
10 seconds.
Okay, I'll just kind of hold it there, and we'll get back later. Hate to get cut off. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Brooke. I'll pass it back over to Chris, who will go through the candidates for Attorney General.
For Attorney General, we have TJ Donovan of South Burlington. TJ unfortunately could not make it at the last minute. Chris Erickson of Chester. Brooke Page of Washington. And Brooke, if you want to talk about your plans for Attorney General, we can give you about 60 seconds.
Okay, very good. The Attorney General's office, I've run for several times, first against Bill Sorrell, and now this will be my second go at Mr. Donovan. I have a number of concerns with the Attorney General's office, and the biggest one, I guess, in my mind goes back to Bill Sorrell, and TJ Donovan has carried on the tradition of failing to act as the chief law enforcement officer of the state, which is the second part of this. Attorney General is the lawyer for the state, but he's also supposed to be the chief law enforcement officer, coordinating with attorney generals in other states to try to keep crime and illicit business activities under control. And I see very little of that going on. Mr. Donovan hasn't spoken out against defund the police or
10 seconds.
I'm sorry, we'll hold it there because I won't get the rest of the thought in.
Sorry to cut you off, but we got a lot of questions we want to get through today. So finishing off the Attorney General list, Emily Payton of Putney is also running for Attorney General. Emily is not here. That wraps up the introductions of candidates. And just as a quick note, as this is an off year for our 2 United States senators, no candidates for US Senate are included here. Throughout the event, if you have any questions that you would like to ask during the moderated question and answer session, after our 4 pre-sent questions, please put them in the chat and our facilitators will add them to the list. Either one of the moderators can ask the question or you can ask it yourself. If we have time for your question and you've noted, we'll call on you to speak. John?
Thanks, Chris. And each candidate was provided with 4 questions prior to the event. We'll work through these questions first, then go on to a question and answer session. The candidates will be asked in reverse order from how we just introduced them, and then we'll flip it for each other question so it kind of goes like a snake about who's responding first. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the question. Sarah will notify you when you have 10 seconds left, and then if you're going over the 2 minutes, we'll cut it off to just make sure we can get through. We want to make sure everybody gets a chance to address a particular question at a time. All right. So I'll go. The first question we have is related to housing. So according to the Vermont Housing Finance Agency, 50% of renters in Vermont are paying 30% or more of their household income on rent, with a vacancy rate of about 3.4% and 2.8% in Windham County. If you're elected, what is your primary plan to address this issue, or what role do you see yourself playing in advocating this issue or advancing it in your particular position? And let's start with Mr. Page again, because you're still muted there, Brooke. You just want to make sure you unmute yourself. Looks like you're still muted, Brooke.
I get a little message up eventually. Okay, here we go. A little bit out of my wheelhouse here as either SOS or AG, but just a few moments, I'd like to speak about this. I think the greatest problem we have as far as housing, obviously, is the expense, but the other part of that is we don't seem to have solutions that get folks into ownership. And I think ownership of your home or housing is one of the most important things from a pride standpoint. And instead of being enslaved to the landlord for a lifetime, home ownership allows people to build equity and savings through the home that they own. And like I said, neither of these really relate closely to the Attorney General or SOS office, but it's just an observation that it would really be good if we could reduce the cost of housing to some extent, but of equal importance to be able to get them to get into an ownership position where instead of just paying rent, they're actually paying a mortgage. I'll call it quits there.
Great, thanks, Brooke. Jim, could you address that question, please? And if you need to see the question, you should be able to see it on the screen. It should be Sarah in case you need to remind.
That's
Jim,
fine. That's
it's
great.
Jim
I see it now. Yeah, this is something that actually has been near and dear to my heart. As Tim Ash knows, when I was the chair of the South Burlington City Council, during my tenure, we probably constructed over 1,000 affordable housing units in the city of South Burlington. We worked with Cathedral Square, Burlington Land Trust, and other organizations. Part of that was around the area of home ownership. And we've won in South Burlington under my tenure, we won many awards for smart growth. And I was actually honored by the affordable housing groups for the work that I did at that time. It is absolutely critical that we get people into affordable housing. And part of the problem is that the cost of housing is so expensive in Vermont. And really the way to drive that down is to have every city or town take the ownership of that issue by providing for higher density development. That's what drives the cost of housing down, is the density available. I'll leave it at that because I know we don't have a lot of time here.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Condos. Brenda Siegel, could you answer the question, please?
Sorry, I was having a rough internet moment. So I'm going to start by saying that housing is one of the most intersectional issues that we face, and we need a homes guarantee. But in order to make housing affordable, we need a multi-pronged approach that includes increasing the availability of rental properties to including mixed income housing stock and affordable units, and that don't sundown. Enacting rent control and increased tenant protections, including tenant unions, to ensure that housing is safe and accessible, and that the lack of housing does not continue to harm tenants and allow landlords to disregard the laws in place to protect tenants, which happens a lot in Southern Vermont. However, increasing housing stock alone is unlikely to solve the problem of affordability, and to focus on increasing the economic prosperity of low and middle wage income earners needs to be central in a plan to increase that affordability. We need to ensure that we are passing and securing livable wages and paid family and medical leave. We need to ensure that the economic realities of people seeking housing are in line with the realities of the cost of living. In addition to these policies, linking education taxes from property taxes, and instead an institution of progressive income tax would help us to solve that problem as well. And right now we need to remove the regressive burden of low income earners when we're talking about housing. And I would say that in Southern Vermont, there's plenty of people that it also impacts our climate crisis, because there's plenty of people that are moving outside of the more city centers because our housing crisis, because they are able to find more affordable housing. And so this, again, this issue is one of the most intersectional issues that we face.
Great. Thanks, Brenda. Debbie Ingram, can you answer the question next, please?
Sure, thank you. So housing is a multifaceted problem, and it needs multiple solutions. I've been an affordable housing advocate for the last 13 years, have also chaired 2 different housing task forces in Williston. So I just really briefly mention 3 things. One is we do need to invest more in increasing the housing stock. One huge problem is that we just simply don't have enough units. The legislature 2 years ago, we passed a $35 million bond, which also leveraged more federal funds. I like that kind of idea. I think we need to continue to do that. Secondly, I would mention helping municipalities to actually focus their growth in town or city centers, and then pass the kinds of ordinances that Jim Condos was mentioning, density bonuses, height bonuses, reduced setbacks, reduced requirements for parking, things where we actually create centers and we can keep the housing costs down and make our towns more pedestrian friendly and livable, and keep sprawl out from our rural areas. And then third, for those who do get into the rental market, we have a lot of very old housing stock. We need a better system of inspections, and we need some funds available to help landlords make sure that they keep the housing stock in good shape, so that people can live in decent housing as well.
Great. Thank you, Debbie. Jim Ho, can you answer the question next, please?
Thank you. Brooke Page answered the first half of my answer for me. Make it easier to buy a house and lower the ratio of tenant to landlord. And maybe one of you activists out there knows about the relationship of the F-35 to the housing situation in Burlington. But my solution is a state bank. With a state bank, such as they have in North Dakota, the prospective buyer would be borrowing money from the state bank, from the state of Vermont at a very reasonable interest, at a low interest. And the money that he paid back would go back into the state's coffers. And that would save Vermont from borrowing money from Wall Street. And that would save the homeowner from buying money, from borrowing money from TD Bank North or an out-of-state bank. There are very few in-state Vermont banks left, and I think they're precious. And combined with a state bank, that would produce the finances that would help more people buy their own homes. Thank you. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Hoag. Molly Gray, can you answer the question next, please?
I think one of our greatest challenges facing our state, again, is our demographic challenges. And how do we keep a generation here? And I want to talk about housing, but before I get into that, I think it's important to take a step back and just reflect on how many different ways our generation often splits up the paycheck. Is it student loan debt? Is it childcare? Is it rent or a mortgage payment? Is it healthcare? And sort of the list goes on. And we have to address affordable housing, but we also have to address all the other costs that a generation's dealing with. So I'd strongly support childcare, which we'll talk more about, paid family and medical leave, and why that's so important for our generation. And again, access to a livable wage and access to the internet. But specifically when it comes to affordable housing in Vermont, I think we have to recognize that the needs of Brattleboro may be different than the needs of Burlington or Bennington or Orange County, where I grew up, where we have a lot of housing stock, but it's not weatherized, it's not handicap accessible. Honestly, it's not safe. And so if we're going to approach the housing needs in Vermont, we really have to understand the diversity of those needs and then how we're going to address them. If we look at Brattleboro, for example, and I think, given this is the Southern Vermont Young Professionals, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Brooks House. And I think I was just there touring it a couple of weeks ago. I think it's a really, really good example of where the community came together. There was a lot of investment to take a property and to turn it into housing. Also CCV, I know, is there, I believe the VTC campus as well, but think about how to create multi-use, how to make it accessible. So as Lieutenant Governor, what I'd like to focus on is, one, how do we commit ourselves to a real statewide need assessment, aligning our budget with our greatest needs, and then use the expertise of a generation that's figured out how to make it work in places like Brattleboro.
Great. Thank you, Molly. Dana Colson, can you answer the question next, please?
Yes. There are several factors that go into the cost of housing. First is market supply and demand. And then the second is construction costs. I have done some building myself. I've run excavators, backhoes, and pounded a lot of nails. Act 250 raises those costs. I can give you an example of one house in Tunbridge where it costs $10,000 in Act 250. That would go a long ways towards a down payment for a lot of families. I'd like to see more people transition to home ownership. VHFA regulations and down payments are something that need to be taken a look at. When interest rates are low, the banks don't want to lend money. They don't want to take any risk. So they're not going to give that money out very freely. So those are all issues we really need to look at. And as your Lieutenant Governor, I would focus on and transition more people to their own housing. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. John, you're muted.
My bad. See, we all forget about it. Thanks, Dana. Tim Ash, could you answer the question next, please?
All right. Yeah, thank you. And we're all to be forgiven for the occasional muting snafu. Well, this has been the focus of my professional life, both affordable housing development and community and economic development projects. And I can say that Vermont has a wonderful ecosystem of affordable housing organizations, state regulatory agencies, and professionals on the ground So we know the differences from county to county, and really the issue is money at this point. I'll say that a couple of years ago, I helped write a homeowner first-time down payment assistance program. It has now helped about 1,200 young people buy their first home throughout the state, most of which is outside Chittenden County, which is very important. I, as Lieutenant Governor, will be advocating for an expansion of that, a significant expansion to get people affordable homes. I also believe now is the time for a significant housing bond. The first bond we did created about 1,000 units and renovated about 1,000 units across the state. I believe we have to go much bigger than that. And those funds can be used just as the first bond was, in a county specific way, so that each county's unique needs will be met. We also need to do enforcement of existing housing laws. One of the first professional experiences I had in Southern Vermont was when I was a community action housing director working with residents of the Alta Gardens mobile home park in Pownell, where conditions were the worst I had ever seen in a housing community in the state of Vermont. And a lot of these housing units are sight unseen by anybody doing any inspection, and we need to change that. I have a lot of experience in terms of meeting the unique community needs. Molly just mentioned Brooks House, the Putnam Block, obviously in downtown Bennington, the revitalization of Barry and St. Albans. I was instrumental in writing the policies and funding for both Brooks House and for the Putnam Block. And I was on the Vermont Economic Progress Council that oversaw the St. Albans and Barry revitalization. So I believe that we need to make a much bigger bet in our local communities. And as pro tem of the Senate, I've been doing everything I can to push more and more resources to the communities that have been starved of resources in the past.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Ash. Linda Joy Sullivan, can you answer the question next, please?
Thank you. So first, I want everybody to appreciate, once again, I'm here running for the Auditor of Accounts position, which involves the examination of finances and program performance and independence, rather than having my legislator hat on, which speaks of policy. So I'm going to respond from the auditor candidacy, position.
Yeah, great. That's exactly what we're looking for. Thank you.
Okay, good. Not that I'm not passionate about speaking from the legislator point of view. However, I actually think that would be fair game from an auditor standpoint to actually look at the efficacy of the rental subsidy programs in Vermont. I think that means, is it really working and making a real impact on those who are in need? Or is more funding needed? And sometimes I think that we are usually well-intentioned, but do we actually deliver half a loaf because we are cash strapped? So I'd want to know, as an auditor, if there is a need for more programs or a need to administer them better. And I am, as an auditor, interested in seeing if the area, from the opinion and after the research is done, would clearly identify if there is a correlation to young professionals actually leaving the state and what that correlation is. And I'm going to pass the question.
Great. Thanks, Linda. I'm going to hand it over to Chris who will ask the next question.
The next question is on childcare. According to Let's Grow Kids, 3 out of 5 of Vermont's youngest children do not have access to the childcare that they need. The U.S. Census Bureau estimates that approximately 71.5% of Vermont children under the age of 6 have all available parents in the labor force, meaning that they are likely to need some sort of childcare while a parent is working. This means approximately 21,225 children under the age of 5 in Vermont are likely to need some form of childcare. If elected, what will be your primary policy to increase the access and affordability of childcare? Or what role do you see yourself playing in increasing access and affordability of childcare? And what is your primary suggestion on how the state government can accommodate childcare needs in a remote work environment? We are going to flip the list, and Linda, you're going to go after the lieutenant governor candidates. So we'll start with Tim Ash.
All right, thank you. It is an extremely pressing challenge. And I remember in the year 2000, when I was working for Bernie, being at an event at Randolph High School where we were talking about the childcare crisis, and we had the head of childcare in Quebec, where it's universal, also the head of childcare for the US Army, which has the probably best universal childcare policy in North America. And the real issue here is the financial support from the federal government, which has basically evaporated, plus all of the income inequality issues that have arisen, which make it harder for families to afford it, and also don't pay the people who do the work very much. So I'm not great at glossy statements. I have seen under the hood of the state budget. I know how challenging it is to come up with the resources. I also know that with 2 consecutive governors who have been unwilling to put more resources on the table, it's always a fight for scarcity. But the short term, as Lieutenant Governor, will be making sure that during COVID, the state is using the federal funds we have to make sure parents can afford childcare, and that we're paying to prop up the childcare slots that are so desperately needed to get our economy going, especially if schools are on this so-called hybrid schedule. So that is a practical issue that needs immediate attention, and will be my primary focus as Lieutenant Governor in the first days. The second is beefing up our childcare subsidies to young families. It provides income to a wide array of income levels. Under my leadership in the Senate, we provided a big boost. We know that we need more, but that is absolutely critical as an economic development policy. And then more long-term, it's really about how we fulfill a broader vision, which treats early care, birth through kindergarten, the same way we think of K through 12, which is an entitlement public benefit program. We need to eliminate the 3-tier system and slowly merge so every parent knows they'll have a high quality program regardless of income or where they live.
Thanks, Tim. Dana Colson.
Thank you. Know a little bit about childcare. I've been a parent, a single parent, and a step parent. So I've dealt with these issues myself. We had a good local preschool program, and I support those. We also got to look at lowering taxes for working families. One idea could be a child care savings account, similar to a health savings account, where people put money into that account pre-tax to pay for child care services. And lowering taxes and boosting our economy may allow one parent to stay home while the other parent works. Well, that worked for a lot of centuries for people, and it'll be nice if we could afford to get back to that. I don't think big government programs and subsidies are the way to go. They're inefficient, and the bureaucrats take their cut out of every penny of that. I'd rather see working families control their own money and how they spend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana. Molly?
One of the greatest economic investments we can make is an investment in childcare in Vermont, and specifically universal childcare, so that every child, no matter where they're born or where they're brought up, or the economic opportunity accessible to their family, has access to childcare and early childhood education. So what we know right now is that we still need to align our budget with our greatest needs, and the childcare needs come to roughly 33 million. Yet again, it's 2020 and we still don't have access to childcare. One of the first things that I called for as a candidate was trying to provide an example of just one way we could invest in childcare rather than incarceration, by looking at our for-profit prisons in Mississippi, where roughly 225, I think 230 Vermont inmates are held. We now have much more space in our prisons here in Vermont, in bringing inmates home in order to save money and to invest that money or reinvest that money into childcare. That's just one example of something we could do. And again, it wouldn't cover the entire need, but I think working with our federal delegation and working with our state, we could address the childcare needs. And what do those needs look like? One, it's expanding the childcare assistance program, and it's expanding reimbursement rates so that childcare is more accessible and our childcare providers are receiving funding and have a livable wage. It's making sure they have the personal protective equipment to operate and open safely. It's also making sure that we do have a paid family and medical leave program. And this is why it's important. As our schools reopen, and we know that we may be on a mixed schedule of in-class or online learning, where that's possible, and that's another issue we can talk about, broadband, but we have to make sure our parents are supportive and the community comes together to ensure that we have a flexible work schedule. We know in Quebec, which was mentioned earlier, that having paid family and medical leave.
Sorry, Molly, we have to cut you off. Next after Molly is Jim Hogue.
Thank you. I hadn't planned to mention money in this answer, but since everybody else has, it reminds me of all the different times I testified at the State House on behalf of the state bank. And Tim Ash's committee is one of the places where I spent some time. And after many of us finished explaining the virtues of a state bank and how important it was, people would say to us, senators, and would say to us, well, what problem are you trying to solve? Well, you just heard a mouthful today. Every single person has explained the problems that we need to solve. And then someone will come back and say, well, yeah, state bank, that sounds interesting, but what problems are you trying to solve? Well, thank you. You've all answered that part of the question. So very specifically, open the schools immediately. There has not been one single case worldwide of a student transferring the COVID to a teacher. And that, by the way, comes from Dr. Martin Woolhouse, epidemiologist at the University of Edinburgh. And so that's really good news. And the other really good news is that the levels in Sweden of deaths have flattened out, and the levels in Belgium have not, where they wear masks. Everybody wears a mask and everyone is in lockdown, and Sweden is the exact opposite. And the numbers are reversed too. Very few deaths in Sweden, lots of deaths in Belgium. I have those numbers somewhere, but that's not important. So
10 seconds.
Excuse me?
10 seconds.
Okay. Yeah, and keep an eye on 5G. I don't think it's healthy for kids in schools.
Thank you, Jim. Debbie Ingram.
Thank you. So this is actually an issue that I have been a champion on in the Senate. I serve on both the Health and Welfare Committee and on the Education Committee. And often there is a little friendly tug of war about whose jurisdiction this comes under, because it, well, certainly our childcare for 0 to 5 it's not babysitting, it's actually early education. And I have a vision of a childcare system in Vermont in which parents all across the state in every region have access to affordable childcare. And I think I'm fond of doing things in threes, so I'm going to cite three things that I think we should be doing. One is we should look again at CCFAP, the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. A couple of years ago, we passed some legislation that I championed to raise the subsidies. They're on a sliding scale by income for families. We need to continue to make adjustments, increase that so that childcare is affordable for everyone. Secondly, we need to continue to invest in childcare facilities to make it easier for people to open facilities and to give them some financial boost and incentive to be able to do that. And then third, we need to look at helping our childcare workers by providing scholarships and tuition payback, loan repayment funds, because it's expensive to get the education that they need to be able to do their jobs. So those are the three main things that I would work on as Lieutenant Governor.
Thanks, Debbie. Brenda Siegel?
Thank you. So I believe that we need to fully fund our education system from cradle to grave. That way we stop the divide between early care, pre-K, K through 12, and higher education. This includes funding our entire system in an equitable way. We need paid family and medical leave. And in my vision, our system would provide high quality childcare to every family that needs it, regardless of income or job status. We need to begin by taking care of our children and invest in them, as they are the future of our state. Furthermore, we need to fully implement the ethnic studies standard into our educational system, and that includes early child care, in order to ensure that all children are treated equitably and are protected. Additionally, we have a huge opportunity actually, which is to make childhood care centers into our schools, our small schools, especially in rural communities, and that will help as well. When my son was young, we qualified for subsidy, but many jobs would have meant just working the job to just pay for childcare. I was the only parent, I am the only parent, and this is neither equitable or accessible. And so what we have to do is fully fund that education system. In terms of COVID, I just want to say that we have to both pay our childcare workers equitably, and we have to make sure that we are offering PPE, but we also have to address that some families cannot send their children back to school because they are particularly vulnerable to this disease. And that means that we have to figure out ways to support those families, those parents. When I think about it as a mom, running for lieutenant governor while I was homeschooling my child was not easy, and we have to figure out how we are going to be able to make that work as well. So we have to think of all the contingencies.
Thank you, Brenda. Linda Joy Sullivan.
Thank you. I think that one issue that can actually be looked at as an auditor, okay, would be the quality of the working relationship between the Agency of Education and DCF around pre-K. I think that there have been tensions in the past, and that the scheme that the legislature came up with, that both agencies will actually share responsibility, may be a bit awkward and might be inefficient, or it may be working. So we can't afford inefficiencies in how we're providing working families with pre-K education and supports. And I think that is an area that should be audited. I also believe we need to look at use compliance audits to make sure that we're looking at safety, we're looking at appropriate licensing, and that we are making sure that everybody is in compliance with what the state says they need to be in compliance with, so that when children do go in for these different childcare facilities and services, that we know they will be safe. I also think that due to the pandemic and the funds coming in, we need to be absolutely sure that we are in compliance with what we are allowed to use those funds for, so that we don't have a visit from the special investigator and says, give us back the money. So I would look at that as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Jim Condos.
Thank you. Although this issue really has nothing to do with my office directly, it does indirectly. About 40% of my staff have children at home. And with this COVID crisis we have a real problem in how those folks are going to come back to work if they can't have affordable childcare available to them. In many cases, the childcare that they had received before is no longer in effect, or they can't meet the requirements of the PPE and other social distancing models. I also have 2 grandkids, and this is important to my daughter as a young professional. She's a CPA, and it's she finds it a struggle to find affordable childcare where most of her paycheck isn't going towards childcare. However, it's a deeper problem than that. When I served in the state Senate, I was the chair of education, and I was the first one to bring forward a bill for early education and childcare. We knew back then that 90% of the inmates or not just inmates, but people in our under corrections control were either couldn't read or write to grade level, or they had 80% of them had a substance abuse problem. So what do we do about that? Well, this goes back to the child care. This goes back to early education. 0 to 5 is the most significant brain development period. A kid who reaches grade 3 without reading to grade level will probably never catch up.
10 seconds.
This is where we really need to focus on childcare. It's an integral part of our future.
Thanks, Jim. Brooke Page.
Got it now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very good. Getting better at this learning curve. Once again, as Jim pointed out, Secretary of State and really Attorney General, this is a little bit out of the day-to-day wheelhouse. But several observations I would make. I know a few years ago, not so long ago, there were drastic changes in the regulations for childcare. And at that time, many of those smaller operators went out of business and only making the pool of available resources even smaller. My wife actually worked in a small childcare center in Barrie years ago on a volunteer base. It was run by a retired Catholic nun, and she was devastated by the condition that the children came to the daycare center. So it's not just keeping an eye on the kids, but in poorer communities, it's really taking care of the kids in the sense of getting them bathed and washing their clothes and other things. And that was really kind of an eye opener for my wife, Donna, and for myself. I think that Dana pointed out another important thing is that things have changed so much where the economy relies on both parents in a two-parent household to be working. And so there's nobody left to take care of the kids. And if we can reset our thinking process or our model so that parents, at least during these early years till they get ready for kindergarten, can somehow stay at home and tend to their own children, I think that's by far better than having them shipped off at very young ages to be taken care of someone else. I think a big problem we have with lack of bonding in the nuclear family these days is because the parents are never really involved in the child's care as much as they should be when they're young. That'll do it.
Thank you, Brooke. That wraps up the second question. Quick reminder for everybody, if you have a question for the candidates that you want to ask during the moderated Q&A session, please put it in the chat to Sarah Lang and she'll add it to our list. Until we get to that point, no questions will be asked to the candidates other than the ones on the list. Going on to our third question. Let's get it on the screen. There we go. Our third question is on diversity. So from 2010 to 2018, Vermont attracted just 8,548 international immigrants, fewer than all but 3 states in the nation. With projections showing a steady population decline in the state, what would be your primary policy you would propose to create a culture of welcoming to diverse newcomers that Vermont needs for an economically and culturally robust population? Similarly, what role do you see yourself playing in creating a culture of welcoming to the diverse newcomers that Vermont needs for an economically and culturally robust population? We're going to flip the list that we just did. So Brooke Page, you're up first.
Okay, here we go. Am I good?
Yes, I can hear you.
Once again, I guess this is only tangentially related to either the Attorney General or Secretary of State's office, But I think the best way for us to ensure that our population starts to grow rather than continue to decline is to make Vermont a good place to come and live. From an economic standpoint, that there are jobs here, from a cost standpoint, to try to lower the cost of use taxes. And hopefully we'll have in-migration of folks from other states and other countries. You know, I get a little concerned when we're talking about trying to control the mix, or, you know, deciding what kind of people we want to come here. And you know, it's kind of like, instead of just welcoming everyone, suddenly we're trying to change the formula or something, instead of just making Vermont just a great place to live for everyone, and whoever shows up, God love them, you know? I guess I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke. Jim Condos?
This one is near and dear to my heart, and although I disagree with my opponent who says that it doesn't have anything to do with the Secretary of State's office, there is some Secretary of State authority here. First of all, as I said earlier, all four of my grandparents came here to the United States from overseas. My grandfather, one grandfather was a Finnish carpenter, the other grandfather enlisted in the Army. Since that time, they have their children became major contributors to their communities. They served in the military, World War II in Korea. They were a restaurant manager, a CPA, an interior office architect, a bus driver, a chemist, a home builder, and a secretary. And in my generation, we have a dentist, a mayor of a New Jersey town, a police officer, a hospital employee, sales reps, a realtor, performing arts director, teachers, stay-at-home moms, and me as Vermont Secretary of State. I think that we should be welcoming immigration into this state. I think we should be welcoming immigration into the United States. And I think that in that vein, as far as what we do, we have made it easier for professionals from overseas to come to the United States and actually work in Vermont get their professional licensing. On top of that, we've also instituted, even though we didn't meet any of the federal guidelines or thresholds for foreign languages, we've implemented 6 foreign languages that we have translated ballots for, and we're piloting that this year in both Burlington and Winooski, which are 2 of the most diverse communities in the state. We're pleased to do it. We think it's the right thing to do, and we are moving forward with it.
Thank you, Jim. Linda Joy Sullivan?
Thank you. So the auditor specifically should not have an active role in advocacy for this particular position. However, I can say that it's not inconsistent from the standpoint of the economical health of the state to actually encourage migration from other states, even internationally. And I think that if in a position to actually look at the performance of the Agency of Commerce or their partners in the economic development field, that we also should be looking at issues relating to the dwindling population in numbers. So I would suggest doing diversity audits. And that would be a thorough review of the employment practices that actually make up what the workplace is about. And I believe that when you're doing that diversity audit, it's very important that we examine occupation, we examine differences in skills and abilities, we look at personality traits, and we look at values and attributes, and go in, once again, with an independent mind and not have any prejudgments. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Brenda Siegel?
Thank you. And I want to just start, I know this is not a debate, but I want to just start by saying that I have a commitment to my Black and brown sisters and brothers. And I need to say right now that it does matter that we actually name, that we create diversity in our education system, in our schools, and in our workplace, and in our state. There's a lot of hate across this state right now. And if we do not name it, then we are not doing our job. Any white person who hears that be said has to name it. In addition to that, we need to diversify our workplaces, and we can start with our state government. And that means intentionally changing our hiring practices, intentionally going and finding communities of color with which to advertise to, not just putting it out there and saying, well, we're open to everyone. We have to make sure that we're intentionally working on that. In addition, we need to our fair and impartial policing to actually be expanded. And I have been working on that with the ACLU in Southern Vermont, although a little less this year, in working with our sheriff's department and our local police stations. And I think it's really important for us to do that work as well, because that makes us a more welcoming and safe society. In addition to that, we need to increase work visas, and that's on a national level, but also on a state level. We need to be doing this work more intentionally. We also have to just root out the things that make it unsafe here for Black and brown communities, language around all lives matter, language around somehow not putting the focus on this, because so much harm is caused to our communities across this state. And while this is not directly related to your question, I actually think it is directly related to your question, because this is one of the reasons that Black and brown communities are not safe in our state right now. We are in the top 5 for racial disparity in our prisons. 1 in 14 Black men ends up in jail. We have to do better, and that means we have to name it every time we hear it.
Thank you, Brenda. Debbie Ingram.
First of all, I'd like to thank you folks for asking this question. This is just a super question. It's so important to get at this. And, I absolutely agree. We have to be the most welcoming state that we possibly can be. And that means we have to dismantle racial injustice, systemic racism, and any kind of barriers to other groups of people, like the LGBTQ community, people of different religions, folks living with disabilities. We need to really be that exceptional Vermont that we often think of ourselves as, but the data doesn't always show that we completely live up to that. But let's put everything that we can into making sure that we are that state. And then, yes, let's go and let's talk to and the lieutenant governor's position is the absolute best platform to do this. I would love to go visit historically Black colleges and universities and say to them, if we make good progress in dismantling systemic racism in our schools and our housing and our healthcare and our financial systems and our law enforcement, and I would proudly go and say, you are very welcome in Vermont. Please come. You will find a state that is welcoming to you. I told you I came as a member of the LGBTQ community because civil unions had been passed. I mean, let us do the things that we need to do to remove barriers, to make people feel welcome. And then absolutely the lieutenant governor's position would be a great position to make our state visible and to be inviting to these folks in these different groups.
Thank you, Debbie. Jim Hogue.
Thank you. So this question had to do with international immigrants. Mrs. Hogue is a recent international immigrant, and my wife has been treated very well by everyone she's met. The red carpet has been laid out for her everywhere in Vermont. I agree with Brooke Page completely. I think the question is begging us to give Brooke Page's answer, which is make Vermont a welcoming place for people and see who makes it. And what I would like to mention is my best friend for a while was in the refugee center in Colchester. So I heard those stories. I live in dairy farming territory. These people cannot survive without immigrants. Everybody I know is a Spanish speaking person at these farms. So I think Vermont does a wonderful job in bringing immigrants in to the state. I don't know how we can do any better than we do. The taxes are driving people away, that's for sure. But we're certainly bringing people in. And Vermont could be a leader in land management and growing soil, clean water, flood mitigation, and that would bring in more people. And I want to mention that also my forefathers and mothers were here fighting in the War of Independence. So I feel kind of a connection to the whole concept of what America is, both through literature and through politics and through culture. And
10
I
seconds.
see, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Molly Gray.
I think our work first begins with getting Donald Trump out of the White House. What we're seeing right now and what we've seen over the last several years is a massive focus on closing Vermont's borders. We're even seeing a potential defunding of USCIS, Citizenship and Immigration Services, that's housed right here in Vermont, one of the 4 visa processing centers nationally. So I think we need to continue to work with our federal delegation and push towards the general election in November and new leadership. But to dig down specifically here in Vermont, I think we have to ask ourselves 2 questions. Why are we one of the whitest states, or the whitest state in the United States? And also recognizing that we have one of the oldest states in the country, what actions can we take right now? And I think it comes back to 1, rooting out systemic racism wherever it exists. I know we'll talk about criminal justice reform in the next question, so I won't go into that now, but around education, around access to housing, access to employment, supporting the Vermont Human Rights Commission and making sure that it's adequately funded so we can hold perpetrators accountable, or anyone that's making it challenging for our Vermonters to access those services. But also recognizing that even in response to our pandemic, we didn't adequately translate basic health and safety information for Vermont's refugee community in Winooski. And we saw the outcomes of that. And I was just talking to a number of individuals living in Winooski this last week, and we still continue to struggle with addressing adequate translation throughout our different systems. So that's another area where we can do more. But I think finally, the question is, how do we
10
promote
seconds.
Vermont? What does that look like? And how can we change the culture of our state to make it more welcoming and diverse, knowing that will make us more resilient and strong for the future?
Thanks, Molly. Dana Colson.
Thank you. I fortunately have had the experience of doing a lot of international travel and experiencing a lot of different countries and cultures. And I really enjoyed that time of my life. And so I celebrate diversity. And I interestingly had a court hearing over in Rutland at the federal courthouse regarding my son's case. So I was sitting there with a assistant U.S. attorney, and there was an immigration naturalization ceremony going on. And so I was one of the first ones to welcome some new citizens. There was a table there where they could sign up to vote as well. As far as the population decline, we got to stop taxing and spending and over-regulating people out of this state. We need to keep people here. Kids coming out of college need jobs, and if we boost our economy, we can keep more of them here. That would help reverse this population decline situation, and that's the best place to start. And then I agree, we welcome everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Tim Ash.
Yeah, thanks. And this is an area of real passion for mine. Long before I was running for lieutenant governor, I convened a meeting in Burlington of a number of employers of new Americans and a number of the organizations that support them when they arrive and to help them get their feet underneath them. And I was amazed at the stories that the employers were telling of the steps they'd taken to make sure that their workplaces viewed diversity as a strength, not as a hurdle to overcome. And in fact, one fast growing employer, Twincraft, which has been growing like gangbusters year after year after year, said if it weren't for new Americans in their workforce, they would not be in Vermont. And that was a real wake up call to everyone in the room. So I've been very proactive in this area, and as Lieutenant Governor would make it one of the highlights of my 2-year term. And let me just tell you a couple of the things I've been doing to help make Vermont the gold standard to bring new Americans and support them in the workforce. First, the Secretary of State mentioned a little bit about creating pathways to licensure for people who come to Vermont from other countries to make sure that their highest level of training and education in another country are recognized here in Vermont. We all hear about people who might have been a doctor in another country and then they wind up in the US in a job, whether it's in cleaning services, things like that. Second, I found that one of the great barriers for employment for many new Americans and something that limited their options was an inability to get a driver's license because of a struggle with the language on the written test at the DMV. And I wrote legislation instructing them to expand the number of languages our written DMV driver's license test is translated into from 3 to 10, which we think is going to be a major difference maker. Also making sure that state employers, whether it's the state police or any state agency, make sure that they're also making culturally appropriate practices. And then also.
Sorry, Tim, we had to cut you off. That wraps up the third question. So I'm going to tag in John to ask the fourth question on police reform.
Great, thanks, Chris. So as Chris said, this question deals with police reform. So criminal justice and policing reform have been very popular discussions over the recent months due to continued demonstrations throughout the state and the country. If there was support to reallocate or redistribute resources dedicated to policing and distribute those resources to more social services platforms, how would you implement that process, and what would be your primary suggestion on how to reallocate those resources? Similarly with other questions that may not apply specifically to your position, but how would you, in your position, advocate for that particular purpose or make sure those goals are accomplished? Thank you. And going with the reverse order, so Tim Ash, could you go again, please?
Well, thanks. And I think the need for these reforms is evidenced by an experience I had in Bennington a few years ago. I was with then Attorney General Bill Sorrell doing a statewide panel on implicit bias in law enforcement. And the chief of police of Bennington actually stood up at a public hearing and said, we don't need training in unconscious bias because we know we don't have any. So I'll let that sink in and you can think about how sort of absurd that statement is. I have been the chief advocate of criminal justice reform in the legislature the last number of years. Just before we adjourned in June, we passed what is called Justice Reinvestment 2. This was a bill that was drafted at my request and with the goal of reducing our inmate population sufficient to return every single out-of-state inmate and to then take the dollars and reinvest them in things like community and restorative justice programs, mental health, and substance abuse disorder treatment to promote public safety. I will tell you, as the Lieutenant Governor, my primary role will be the watchdog and thorn in the side of all of the appointed and elected officials who I have watched too frequently either ignore or water down or slow down the measures we pass in the legislature. The highest level of state law enforcement and public safety have found ways to drag their heels on almost all of the major reforms. And as an outspoken and independent-minded elected official myself, you can count on me to push, prod, and call out anyone who gets in the way.
Great, thanks, Tim. Dana Colson, could you answer the question next, please?
Yes. Over the last 2.5 years, I've had a lot of experience working with criminal justice and law enforcement. Unfortunately, it was almost that was on my son's murder case, which we're the major crime unit. Many people may not know is they have a victim's advocate on staff. She's very helpful. There's also victims advocates at the state's attorney's office and the U.S. attorney's office. You know, I would consider, more social services embedded in law enforcement. But I would look at their recommendations on to how to best accomplish that at an affordable cost. We've got a lot of good law enforcement in this state, a lot of good officers. They're very dedicated and very hardworking. So I fully support them. As part of the criminal justice reform, I was a moderator of an event at Vermont Law School on this, and we promoted the LEAD program, Law Enforcement Against Drugs, a secure rehab facility, which we could use a diversion program to put people into that, saving some court costs. And that would be a major program where drug users would sign an agreement to go into that program, that they can't check themselves out. They have to fully detox, get some counseling and job training, and get their life back on track before they're released. So as your lieutenant governor, those are things I would advocate for in the Senate. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Carlson. Molly Gray, next, please.
This is such an important question. I'm going to try really hard to answer it in 2 minutes, but happy to continue. I think the first question we have to sort of reflect on or think about is separation of powers. The legislature is responsible for drafting the laws that the attorney generals and others statewide implement, right? So what we continue to see or have seen is that we have an uptick in officer-involved shootings in Vermont. We have more suicide by cop than ever before. We've had law enforcement that have been asking for body cameras and are now getting them, which is incredibly important. But we haven't seen the shift that I think many of us who work in the Attorney General's office have continued to see, right? When we open up a case, we see all the areas where an individual hasn't been fully supported throughout their life and then ends up within the criminal justice system. So this is an area where we have to align our laws and our budget with our greatest needs: childcare, support, mental health and support services for our communities, true support for substance use disorder in Vermont, making sure that we're moving funding away from incarceration into different preventative services. The example that I gave on divesting from private prisons, for example, and investing in childcare being top among them. There's so much we can do, but we need the leadership in the legislature and the experience to be able to look at our budgets, understand where we can do that, and then also invest in the services for individuals who are coming out of prison so that they can stay in our communities, so they can access housing and access a job, so we don't have this continuous revolving door. So I think the time is ripe and the time is now, and there's so much we can do in this moment. I look forward to bringing my diverse experience as a human rights lawyer and as an assistant attorney general to the Lieutenant Governor's office to do just that.
Great. Thank you, Molly. Jim Hogue, next, please.
Thank you. I was hoping to steal some answers from your guests, and I finally found one to steal, Molly. The incarceration versus other alternatives is the key. And I think Molly was the only one who addressed the allocating resources question. And if there is a way to do that, it would be in the alternatives to incarceration, which are sometimes counterproductive. The recidivism rate is high. But I want to mention a much bigger thing than this, which is that this question, I believe, came about because the powers that be are telling you, look at what I'm doing. Or look at my hand, look at my hand, while they're doing something else. And this idea has permeated the discussions in Vermont and in other places, when I don't think it should. I think it's a separate question. This idea of defunding the police and diverting their minimal resources, I think is a misdirection. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Debbie Ingram, next, please.
I think this is such a seminal moment in our nation's history that this is really the time for us to ask those hard questions and to try to reimagine what law enforcement, what public safety could be all about. This is a great opportunity, and I really would like to help Vermont, seize this opportunity to be a leader on this. I think that it would be important to divert some of the funds that we spend on, on police forces to embedding mental health workers, substance use disorder experts, and social workers in our traditional police forces, so that we can free up our police to do other things and really focus the people who need to help folks that are in distress in some of the instances in which police are normally called. So, I mean, that's something very, very limited, very practical on the ground that I would first like to see. At the state level, we really only have influence over the Vermont State Police. But a lot of it would also be working with our different municipal police forces. That's why I think my experience being a municipal official is important. But we have a lot of education, I think, and training to do with some of our local forces, and we need to start somewhere, and we need to really seize this opportunity to think big and bold, and how we can really transform our public safety.
Great, thank you so much. Brenda, could you answer the question next, please?
Sure. I want to just start by saying I'm now no longer calling it criminal justice reform, and I've started calling it transformative justice, because we don't need to reform our criminal justice system. We need to undo it and rebuild it. I would push for a ban on chokeholds and the wearing of body cameras. Additional training, of course, but training is not what we need, and we don't need to talk to more prosecutors. We don't need to talk to more state's attorneys or attorney generals. We don't need to talk to more police chiefs or police officers. We need to talk to impacted communities. Impacted communities are the people that need to be at the table for this discussion. And most importantly, we have to transition our funding away from traditional ideas of public safety and toward evidence-based models of building community, which has more impact on the overall safety of our communities in Vermont. We can decriminalize mental illness. I want to just quickly say my nephew died of an overdose 2 years ago after a year in recovery. He was doing really well, had a strong support system, and was shamed and stigmatized with 5 years hanging over his head for breaking into my father's house. 2 weeks after he continued to be shamed for that, he relapsed and died. We have to do better than that. He deserved to survive that disease. Most importantly, though, we have to stop treating Black and brown people as they are criminals just for the color of their skin. In Vermont, we are, as I said before, in the top 5 of racial disparities in our prison system, and 1 in 14 Black men will end up in prison. In addition, the data on traffic stops shows a disturbing trend in stopping people of color at much higher rates than white folks. One way to shift this is to shift some of the funding that currently goes into the system into those impacted communities. We can't shift that into we cannot have it fill a gap in our budget like childcare. It has to instead go into those communities and the resources they need to have better outcomes.
Great, thank you, Brenda. Linda Joy Sullivan, please.
Thank you. I couldn't hit that unmute button so well.
Okay.
So personally, I have actually been interested in how we train our police, and I'm not saying that I think that we have a problem, but it is a national issue. We are responsible for the use of force, use of deadly force and implicit bias, and all of these are issues that can actually be taught, and we have a training center that works with municipalities all over the state. So one question as an auditor that I might have in mind particularly, and this arises from the number of police involved deadly force incidents, whether we have an actual handle on any supplemental training by third-party organizations that might be delivering messaging inconsistent with best practices that are taught at the police academy. And I would be interested in seeing if, when we did do an audit, if there were changes to contracts to improve transparency in arbitration processes for police accountability, whether or not it was recommended that independent investigations of police misconduct should be changed, or other methodology that might be included. I would be curious to see if it would show, if the audit would show that expanding authority over an independent police auditor's use of force allegations should be incorporated. I would be curious to see if the audit identified whether or not there were opportunities for
10 seconds.
for children of color to get other benefits because their parent decided to become a police officer.
Great, thank you very much, Linda. Sorry again to cut you off. We'll just make sure we get everybody in the time. Jim Condos, please.
Thank you. Although this issue doesn't really pertain to the Office of Secretary of State, it does pertain to me as a citizen. And I guess I would just start off by saying, I'm not sure when you hear the words defund the police, what that means. Because some people think they really want to take money away from the police, but others want to take away resources, other resources and personnel. And that may not be the answer. First of all, Vermont has a pretty, is well known for having a pretty good police reform or transformative justice, as Brenda said, system in place. We're far ahead of most of the country. We today are asking our police to do more than they are trained for. And we need to make sure that with the training that they receive is better, is more consistent. We need to eliminate or reduce the inequities between police departments, between the state and the locals. We have a very fractured system in Vermont. But what we really need to do is just to reform, provide the resources, provide the training, and those will be critical as we develop fair and impartial policing expansion throughout the state.
Great, thanks, Jim. And then to close out this question, Brooke Page, please.
Now I think I'm good. Yeah, this is the one that's actually in my wheelhouse as Attorney General. I won't have enough time, but I'll go as fast as I can. I'm not convinced that Vermont police have this implicit bias that everybody wants to talk about. I haven't seen the statistics that talk about the percentage of people based upon race or age or sex or whatever who were stopped and were not guilty. If the number of people who are not guilty is the same across the spectrum, then we don't have a problem. If there's a higher number of blacks who are being stopped or arrested or whatever, who are ultimately wind up not being guilty, then there certainly is a question, but I haven't seen the statistics yet. As far as defunding the police, Vermont doesn't have enough police protection at this time. I live out in Orange County. I'm a half hour from the Middlesex Barracks, half hour from the Bethel Barracks, about 45 minutes from the St. Johnsbury Barracks of the state police. The county sheriff, which is the only other protection we have, is down in Randolph, which is about 20 minutes away. Matter of fact, a few months ago, 2 state police cruisers came chasing up my driveway, and I walked out to ask them what was wrong. They said, "Where are we? This isn't even on the map." And I said, "Lord have mercy. I hope I never have a problem." Of course, out our way, we joked that when you're calling the state police, remind them to bring the the body bags and the yellow tape along with them, because that's whatever has happened
10
is
seconds.
long over. Yeah. Lastly, I just want to real quick mention, we should get all of our prisoners back in state, having them out in state.
All right. Thanks very much, Brooke. Paige. I'll hand off to Chris, who will start addressing the questions from the various viewers.
Okay, so we finished up our pre-sent questions session. We're about to enter the question and answer session. We're supposed to end around 5. Unfortunately, we will run over time just by a little. We have 3 questions. We're going to limit responses to about 45 to 60 seconds. If you do need to go, we will send you these questions and you can respond in writing, and we'll make sure to put that on our Facebook page. So let's just jump right in. First question. There are many public health crises in Vermont, to name a few, but not limited to racism, addiction, domestic and sexual violence, lack of affordable housing. Have you given thought to how your executive team can work to address all of these at once rather than letting an issue fall to the wayside? If so, what's your plan for that? And we will go in the order we just went. So Tim Ash.
Well, that's a pretty massive question. It's basically saying, how do we solve every major societal problem all at once? And I guess my short answer is that what I bring uniquely to this race for lieutenant governor is kind of the understanding of how our state government operates and an understanding of how policy is developed with relationships on both sides of the ledger. And so I think in terms of continuing to make progress on all of those fronts, I'm best equipped to do so. None of them are easy to solve individually, let alone all at once. But I've got the skill set to help keep us moving forward.
Thank you. I got a question, if I can show the question on a slide. Unfortunately, because these were submitted during the event, we can't get a slide up. So if you need me to repeat it, I definitely will. Next up after Tim is Dana Colson.
Thank you. I've got a broad base of skills, good education with a lot of real world experience to back that up. And as your lieutenant governor, I will fight for free market solutions to many of these problems, not big bureaucratic programs where at taxpayer expense, bureaucrats are getting rich. So free market solutions, smaller government, less regulation, common sense regulations. That'll be my solution and what I will advocate for, and I will defend our Constitution and our law enforcement as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Dana. Molly Gray.
I think out of our greatest challenges come our greatest opportunities. And we have an opportunity in this election, in this moment, to think about everything anew. I think one of the questions we always have to ask ourselves, and I'll be asking this every day if I am Vermont's next lieutenant governor, is who's at the table when we discuss systemic racism in Vermont? Who's at the table when we discuss climate change and mitigating the impacts on our farmers and those who are working our lands across the state, our first and worst communities, for example, and the list goes on. So I think this is a moment where we have to align our budget with our greatest need and always allow need to dictate our decision-making and making sure we have the voices of the table who are of those individuals who are most impacted every single day. As a human rights lawyer, as someone who's worked globally in humanitarian response and in crisis, a crisis such as this, I feel like I have the experience and the leadership skills to be a very effective lieutenant governor in this moment.
Thanks, Molly. Jim Hogue.
Thanks. That's certainly a difficult question and a kind of odd one. One thing is to pay close attention to who is running for what post and throw out a lot of the people who are already there, because the progress in the Vermont legislature on very key issues is rather slow. And as someone who has testified frequently, and I watch people knit and look at each other and smirk and play down the importance of very key, knowledgeable witnesses, I think, what are these people doing here? So throw them all out and get some new blood in there who will pay attention to the kinds of things that you want done. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Debbie, I know you have to run, but do you want to respond real quick?
Yes, thank you. I'll respond to this, and then I'm sorry I have to get off. I have a campaign event at 5. But well, it is extremely important to understand the intersectionality of all these various issues. Great question. And actually, there already exists in the government quite a lot of cross-sector groups, and not only within the different agencies, but also with advocacy groups and groups on the ground. I know it's not always visible to folks outside, but we as legislators we often try to develop in legislation to address various issues some kind of structure to make sure that all the different departments and groups are talking to one another and trying to get their best ideas out on the table and discuss them together. So as Lieutenant Governor, I would certainly continue to encourage that practice and do everything that I could to make sure that that's really happening robustly. And I would see my role as actually trying to get the word out more to everyday Vermonters so they actually know what's happening and how their government is working. So thank you. I'm going to jump off.
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you for joining us. Brenda Siegel.
So I actually think one of the things we do wrong is that we don't make these issues intersectional. If we're working on criminal justice reform or transformative justice and we're not working on climate justice, then we aren't really working on transformative justice. If we're working on education and we're not working on the economy, then we're not really working on education. They all are connected together. And so we have to build that overarching framework. I think of it as an overarching framework for climate justice that brings in economic and racial justice in order for us to really make this work. We can't continue to work on these in silos. So while it is a big question, it also is, I believe, the question of our time. How do we work on these things in an intersectional way? And the way is that we build that movement on the ground, the same kind of movements that I've worked on in Southern Vermont, the same kind of grassroots building that we have done around this state to make many of our changes. That's how we work on this in an intersectional way. It isn't the legislators that will lead us, it is us that will lead them.
Thank you, Brenda. After Brenda, I have Linda Joy Sullivan.
Thank you. So from an auditing perspective, to say, how do we encompass all of these issues? I think it's very important that the process of the audit is changed and it becomes more of a proactive audit where we actually go in and don't do a check the box, here's the yes or no opinion, you must do this, but we need to work with internal auditors, management, and take it step at a time and see if the questions are asked correctly, if they've done the research and what is going on, and then take all of those elements and go back and work with them to actually correct and enhance the findings rather than say, this is right, this is wrong, because it must be more proactive because the state of Vermont actually depends on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Jim Condos.
Thank you. So the intersection of issues is a really critical piece. And I know since from my days in the state Senate to even now as Secretary of State, I've been working hard to figure out how to knock down the different silos throughout state government, because believe me, there are silos. And usually it comes down to the agency's funding, and that is unfortunate because it shouldn't be that way. So there are vast issues that occur, and I'll just give you a quick one that pertains to my agency, the Secretary of State's office. We have the Office of Professional Regulation. We have about 50 professions, 75,000 licensees that we oversee and regulate. However, there are another 30, 40 professions that are licensed in state government, but they're licensed in all the different other agencies. And nobody wants to give it up because they don't want to lose the funding that they get from the licensing. And this is the wrong approach. So someone, average citizen, has no clue who to go to for their license. They have to kind of feel their way through it. Another area is this. All right, never mind.
Thank you, Jim. And finally, Brooke Page.
Very good. The question was the original question was such a mixed bag. I think I'm just going to go for generality here and say, Vermont is a rotten place to live, except for all the other places. And just so I'm not misunderstood, Vermont is a great place to live. Have we got problems? You bet. But if you compare to other places, I think we're miles ahead of most places as far as place to live, other than excessive taxes and high cost of living. I worked in West Philadelphia for 30 years. I know what hell looks like. I know what racism looks like. I know what sexism looks like. I know what discrimination of all manner looks like. And I know what crime really looks like. And Vermont may have problems, but trust me, this is not a bad place to wind up. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Brooke. We have one more question. John is going to ask it, and then we are going to wrap up. We will make sure to send these questions in writing so you could respond on your own. John?
Great, thanks, Chris. This question comes from Jessica Smith from one of the viewers. Vermont has a significant amount of children in temporary DCF custody or within foster homes, and many Vermonters feel this system is currently not effective. What is your position, or how would you address this problem? Or and if it doesn't quite necessarily fall in the role of your position, what could you do from your position in government to kind of make sure that that system is working as it should? And we'll start off with Dana Carlson, please.
Sure. First, I would go to the root cause of probably a lot of those issues is broken homes and broken families, which may or may not be due to the drug issue. We've got more kids dying from drugs than we do COVID-19 in Vermont. And my solutions for that, law enforcement against drugs, being taught in the schools to prevent them from going down that path. Two is a secure rehab facility to deal with the existing users. And family needs to play a role here as well. Sometimes grandparents can step up and take kids out of a bad situation. And some cases, maybe we need to look at grandparents' rights on some of these issues. And next is the economy. Financial stress is a big problem for families. And if we can cut taxes, that will help.
Great, thank you, Dana. Molly, could you answer the question, please?
Vermont has a pretty storied history and a pretty troubling history when it comes to foster care. Knowing from working in the Attorney General's office, I know quite a bit about that. And I know there's so much that we still have to learn as a state about where we make investments in childcare, investments in housing. One thing that we knew before COVID-19 was that 50% of Vermonters couldn't handle an emergency expense of $1,000 or more. We have so much inequity in the state. We have a tremendous amount of vulnerability. And I think this continues to highlight for me why we have to address these issues and how we can align our budget again. And I keep saying that with our greatest need and looking out for our communities, looking out for our families. And And that's what I'm committed to doing as Lieutenant Governor, and so much of why I am running for office.
Great, thanks, Molly. Jim Hogue, can you answer the question, please?
Yes, thank you. Many of the questions here have, in fact, I think all of them, including this one, relate to the idea that government will solve all your problems. And this is a very difficult problem. It's one with which I have no experience, either directly or indirectly. I read stories like this in the paper and I shake my head. So what I'm suggesting is that the law has a lot to do with solving this kind of a problem by taking lawbreakers in this category out of the system and putting them in jail. Because people who physically abuse children should not be sent back into that same situation again. I don't know the methods. I don't know how to handle it, but that is one area in which the state definitely has a responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Brenda Siegel, can you answer the question, please?
Sure. So in Southern Vermont, I would say that we have actually a particularly strong problem with this. And it may be unique and slightly different than the rest of the state as well. I participate in a Families United group. There are children who are taken away that should not have been taken away. And it's not okay. And then there are other children who should be protected and are not protected. It is not working on either side. And so we need to re-examine this whole system, root out the bias that is included in the system, and also give more resources so that folks that are working have the tools to really do this work effectively. I think that we have to start to look at substance use disorder and mental illness as disease and figure out how are we going to work with families who are struggling this way. And that means including kinship care and making sure families have that option as well.
Great, thank you, Brenda. Linda Sullivan, can you answer the question, please?
Thank you. So apart from your traditional financial audits and assessing these services, I think in this particular area, forensic audit is very much needed. I think we need to look at the foster care system and identify the grooming process that is going on with trafficking issues. I think we need to look at how monies that trust fund monies that belong to the children in foster cares are being used. I think we need to look at exactly what is going down within the foster care system and act on it quickly. And I truly believe that the forensic audit will uncover areas that could also lead to financial audit arenas and service providers, and that may need to be changed as well. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Linda. Jim Condos, can you answer the question, please?
Sure. So I spoke earlier about if a child reaches grade 3 and can't read or write to grade level, that they'll never catch up. Well, and then what do we do here in Vermont now? We're consolidating and closing some of these small schools. I would propose that one of the ways to try to build this back up, and actually this solves a lot of the other problems like childcare, mental health issues, is to turn these small schools into education facilities that also have capabilities or resources for mental health, social welfare, for childcare, as well as the education side. And if you really focused on that kind of a scenario, you are giving a more holistic and on whole of life background to our youngest citizens who will grow up and we hope to be productive in the future.
Great, thanks, Jim. And then closing this question out with Brooke Page, please.
Kind of out of the wheelhouse, either for SOS or for AG. But this is probably know too much about. Just breaks my heart, you know, that the DCF and the folks that are currently managing our children that are in need of good homes just aren't doing an adequate job. And I'm not sure I have the answer. I don't think that putting kids in a foster home necessarily, it's probably a lot better than what the kids are coming out of, but it's not the ideal situation. I keep, you know, obviously having adopted families is the ideal situation, but we don't seem to be able to do that. And I keep thinking back to in times past, we used to have foundling homes and orphanages. And that didn't work out so well, but maybe in our current environment with much more interest in all of this, that might be an alternative for taking care of these kids. And like I said, I know the question, but I don't have the answer.
Great, thanks, Brooke. I think that wraps up the questions from the group. I'm going to hand it over to Chris, who will send us off.
Well, thank you everybody for attending. I know some of us had to jump off, and like I said, we'll make sure to get all the questions, including the questions, the pre-sent questions, out for anybody that wants to respond in writing. So look for that in your email in the next couple days. For any of the attendees that want to reach out to the candidates, we encourage you to do so. And to all the candidates, thank you so much for your time. And I hope it was informative to see what issues matter to young professionals in the Southern Vermont area. So.
Great, thanks everybody. Hope you all have a great
Thanks,
night.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
and
so
God
much.
bless.